Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into the modern neuroscience of fear and trauma. We're going to uncover not just how these powerful emotions get wired into our brains, but way more importantly, how we can actually use that knowledge to take back control. So let's just jump right in with a huge question, one that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. Is it actually possible to just delete a painful experience from your mind? Well, the science might surprise you on this one.
To even begin to answer that, we've got to build a common language. We need to understand what fear truly is from a biological point of view, because it's so much more than just a feeling.
Okay, so what is fear, for real? It's not just some idea floating around in your head. It is a full body and brain experience. On one hand, you've got the physiological response, the feeling, your heart starts racing, your palms get all sweaty. And on the other hand, you have the cognitive part. All the thoughts, the memories, the story you start telling yourself about what's happening. Both are absolutely essential parts of the fear equation.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, how all these words we use every day actually fit together. See, stress is just that raw physical reaction in your body. Anxiety, that's when we take that stress and we start worrying about something in the future. But fear is the big one. It's got bits of both stress and anxiety in it, but it's its own unique response, usually tied to a very specific threat, whether it's real or just something we perceive.
And when does that fear cross the line into what we call trauma? Well, the working definition is basically when that fear response gets stuck on repeat. It literally gets embedded in our nervous system and starts popping up at times when it's not helpful anymore, when it's actually maladaptive. And that's when it starts limiting our lives in some very real ways. So how does this whole system actually work inside of us? Let's pull back the curtain and meet the key players in your brain's fear circuit. Let's look at the actual machinery behind the emotion. The easiest way to think about your nervous system is like a seesaw. It's constantly trying to find balance. On one side, you've got the sympathetic system. That's your gas pedal, the alert side that ramps you up for action. And on the other side is the parasympathetic system. That's your brake pedal, the calm side that brings you back down. When you feel fear, your brain is slamming its foot on that gas pedal. Now, a huge part of that alert system is something neuroscientists call the HPA axis. It stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, but just think of it like a three-step chain reaction. It all starts in the brain, in the hypothalamus, which sends a signal to the pituitary gland. That in turn tells your adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys, to flood your body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. It is the body's ultimate alarm system. So if you put it all together, there are four main systems that have to work in concert to create that feeling of fear. You've got the HPA axis, which is the body's alarm. You have the amygdala, which acts like the brain's smoke detector, always scanning for threats. Then there's the dopamine system, which is all about motivating us to either escape or find safety. And finally, you've got the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as the CEO, the part that steps in and creates the story, the narrative about what is actually happening. Okay, so we have all this machinery, but how does it turn something completely harmless, a sound, a smell, a place, into a powerful trigger for this massive fear response? Well, the answer goes back over 100 years to something called Pavlovian conditioning. You probably remember the story about Pavlov's dogs, right? They learned to associate the sound of a bell with getting food. Our brains do the exact same thing all the time. They are absolute experts at linking a neutral event with a really powerful emotional or physical response. But, and this is a really critical difference, unlike Pavlov's dogs who needed to hear that bell again and again, our fear system is way more efficient. It's built for something called one-trial learning. This means a single, incredibly intense negative event can be enough to forge a powerful, lasting connection in our brain. The system is designed to keep us safe, so it learns fast and it does not forget easily. And all of this brings us to the single most important idea for actually overcoming fear. This is a fundamental rule of neuroscience that honestly changes everything. So contrary to what most of us might think, you can't just delete a fearful memory. You can't just extinguish it from your brain. Trying to just forget about it or push it away, well, it just doesn't work because that neural pathway, that connection, is already there.
And right here, this is the solution. This is the key. You can't erase that old memory, but what you can do is create a new one. The brain has to learn a new, more powerful and positive association to basically overwrite the old fear response. It's all about replacement, not removal.
We can see this principle in action with things like behavioral therapies. So when someone retells a traumatic story in detail for the very first time, their physical anxiety response is through the roof. It's incredibly high. But then, with each time they tell it again, the size of that physiological response, the racing heart, the sweating, it gets weaker and weaker. The old response is literally being diminished. So knowing this crucial extinguish and replace rule, what are the practical tools we can use? How do we put this whole principle into action and actually take control? Well, the tools basically fall into three main buckets. First, you have behavioral therapies, like prolonged exposure, which are all about diminishing that old response while you consciously write a new narrative. Second, there are drug-assisted therapies. This is where substances like MDMA or ketamine are used in a very controlled clinical setting to change the brain's chemical state, making it more flexible and open to remapping feelings about a trauma. And third, you have self-directed tools, things like specific breathing protocols. Cyclic hyperventilation is a great example, which let you deliberately take the wheel of your nervous system and recalibrate your own stress response. The key thing, though, is that they all work on that same core principle: replacement. And of course, we can't forget the basics. I mean, any effort to rewire fear has to be built on the absolute non-negotiables of good health: quality nutrition, getting enough regular sleep, and maybe the most important of all, having trusting social connections. This is the bedrock you build everything else on. Ultimately, this all comes down to the power of our prefrontal cortex, our inner storyteller. This part of our brain gives us this amazing ability to attach new meaning and new purpose to things that would otherwise just be a simple automatic reflex. It lets us get in there and change the story. Which really leaves us with a final and pretty empowering thought. Since we know now that you can't just erase an old memory, but you absolutely can replace the response to it, well, that means the power is really in your hands. You're the narrator. So the only question left is, what new story will you choose to write?